Have you ever imagined that one day everyone in the city you live in would suddenly turn into monsters? Yes, surely no one would ever dare to imagine such a terrifying scenario. But if we continue to destroy our natural environment, it will only be a matter of time before this happens. When the surrounding air gets worse, so does human health. Who knows? Perhaps one day, people will turn into some kind of strange creature to adapt to a polluted environment. From an early age, my parents allowed me to study in another city so I could receive better education. Lately, my dad had urged me to come home for no specific reason. Having no choice, I had to rearrange my schedule and quickly return home. After more than 10 hours of driving, I had finally arrived at my hometown. The place hadn't changed at all. The air was still dusty and polluted as a result of the chemical waste from the factories. It was unknown to me why I didn't feel well recently. I was always in a state of sluggishness, as if there was no strength left in my body. Under my eyes, strange bruises appeared. I developed a dry cough, even coughed up blood at some point. This was when I was thinking of asking my parents to take me to the hospital and for a checkup before things got worse. The first feeling that I had as soon as I returned to my hometown was emptiness. The bus station was normally supposed to be a crowded place, yet somehow looked so deserted, which was kinda strange to me. After a few minutes of silence, I suddenly heard some strange sounds. As I was still bewildered, a monster suddenly rushed towards me and approached me. It wasn't just one or two, but dozens of monsters with ferocious faces rushing forward. It took me a few seconds to regain my composure. Then I hurriedly turned around and ran away as fast as I could in order to escape the bizarre creatures. I really couldn't understand why those hideous monsters could appear in my city. Where did they come from? And why were they chasing me? Not only that, I couldn't even find a normal human being to ask for help. There were only a few people to be seen, but on a very rare occasion, and the strange thing was, they weren't afraid of the monsters. There were some stalls where the monsters could be seen working as employees, or even had drinks with normal people in pubs. How could it be possible for humans to live with the monsters? What had happened to my city over the last year? I ran for my life trying to get home. Couldn't stop being scared as I called my dad to open the door in panic. My dad appeared as soon as he recognized my voice. I quickly rushed inside, not to forget to lock the door. I sighed deeply and told my father about the story of me being chased by those monsters. Lucky for me, if I slowed down for one bit, I would surely become their prey. And oddly enough, as I told my dad about the incident I had just encountered, he didn't even have any reaction to it. Neither was he worried nor surprised. Well, after a while, he eventually spoke to me, with a very serious look on his face. Recently, do you notice any sign of your body being tired or constantly with bruises appearing under the eyes and you usually coughing up blood or so? Strangely, as far as I can remember, I had never told my father about the bizarre symptoms that I was having lately. But how did he find out about them? Without even paying attention to the extremely bewildered expression on my face, he said, "You are already sick, but don't worry, I have a cure." Then he put his hands on my shoulders and pressed me against the wall. From his pocket, Dad took out a hideous, bizarre-looking piece of meat. He held the meat in front of my face and told me to eat it, and I would completely recover from my illness. It was at that moment I realized there was something wrong with my father's appearance. His face was gaunt, pale. Not only that, there were also bruises on his eyes. And even more strangely, why did he make me eat his hideous piece of meat? He told me that everyone in the city who had similar symptoms to mine had already died, and only this piece of meat could save me from suffering the same fate. But I still couldn't believe a piece of meat like that could cure a disease. Another bizarre thing was, since the moment I was home, I hadn't even seen my mother. Mom was always the one standing at the door, waiting and giving me a hug every time she saw me coming home. Little did I know that from behind the door, there was someone watching me. I didn't intend to eat that piece of meat immediately. I told my dad that I needed to go outside and have some space while trying to figure out what had happened to the city. And as I was on my way, I suddenly remembered my childhood best friend. It had been a very long time since the last time I met Xavier. I hope he still remembers me. So quickly changed my direction and headed to Xavier's place. But as soon as I arrived at the alley, a terrifying scene appeared before my eyes. The monsters were gathering in front of his house. Not only that, they were trying to break down the door. Bizarrely, the monsters were able to speak in human language. It looked like they were asking those who were inside the house to get outside. Inside the house, Xavier was trying their best to hold the door, preventing the monsters from entering. Just like me, Xavier didn't want to eat that creepy meat. She didn't want to become a monster like others. But the resistance of a young girl couldn't stop the power of these huge monsters. A few minutes later, the door had been destroyed by their sharp claws. Despite Xavier screaming, crying, waving violently, the monsters wouldn't let go of her. But I really didn't understand why she was begging her parents to let go of her. Were the monsters her parents? The blue monster took out a piece of meat and gave it to Xavier, telling her to eat it if she wanted to survive. But just like me, Xavier did not want to eat that meat at all. She screamed, cried, pleaded for mercy. She said she didn't want to be a monster. But no matter how hard she tried, Xavier was still forced to eat it. Having successfully forced her to eat the disgusting food, the monsters were delighted. And Xavier, she fell to the ground after taking it, looking desperate. She asked them how they could cruelly turn her into a monster as tears were rolling down her face. She'd rather choose death over living as a monster. Then suddenly her body started to change. The skin became more rough and dry as her eyes suddenly popped out and turned yellow. She was slowly becoming a monster. However, the monsters that she once called Dad and Mom were still smiling, proudly said they had eventually been able to save her life. As I was watching everything, I gradually figured out what had happened. Those monsters were definitely normal human beings being turned into monsters after eating that hideous meat. As a person in a family became a monster, they would certainly try to make others become like them. Soon, the monsters would slowly replace humans and take over the city. Perhaps the best thing to do under the circumstances was to run far away from here. Only that way could I find safety. Then, I turned and ran away. But unfortunately, I accidentally bumped into someone who was standing behind me. It was actually my dad. Was he stalking me the whole time? He still wanted me to eat that disgustingly creepy meat. Of course I knew what would happen to me if I ate it, so I refused to. Seeing me insisting on not eating it, he sadly looked down and said, "If you don't eat this piece of meat, you will die. Do you know that?" I clearly knew that, but I didn't want to become a monster either. If I had to choose between death and living in a hideous-looking monster shape, death would probably be my choice. I was wondering, what was this actually? Had my father and the people of this town lose their minds already? As I was still thinking about it, suddenly I heard some noises of footsteps in the quiet space. The sound got louder and louder. Behind my dad right now was a monster, but somehow I wasn't scared to see it. Moreover, the monster's appearance gave me a familiar feeling. The hair, the eyes, the voice. That monster strangely looked like my mother in so many ways. As I was still bewildered, the monster had spoken. "My son is finally home!" It was indeed my mother. She told me she was afraid that I would be scared by her look, so she wasn't brave enough to show up, despite wanting to hug me tightly in her arms. Seeing the tears on her face, my eyes started to get teary as tears suddenly rolled down my cheeks. I couldn't understand why everyone, including my mom, had eaten the meat and then turned themselves into those creepy monsters. Did all the residents of the city contract a bizarre disease? My dad once again told me to eat the meat before it got too late. I started to feel suspicious again. What about Dad? How come he didn't eat it? I couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. So I looked straight into my father's eyes and demanded him to tell me everything. He looked down, eyes filled with sorrow, as he told me the story that had happened a few months ago, when the air pollution in the city got worse, as factories constantly released toxic emissions. The health of residents in the city slowly deteriorated. They began to notice their bodies were getting weaker as bruises appeared under their eyes, and they usually coughed up blood. Then, a mysterious man who dressed in black with a large X sign on his chest showed up and saved them from the strange disease. He brought them a type of meat that possessed some magic in it. Despite its disgusting look, those who ate it immediately became very healthy, while those who refused to do that were all dead. However, despite being cured from the disease, the people who ate the meat had all turned into monsters, and my mom was not an exception. The mysterious man also said that the other cities were starting to be severely polluted, and sooner or later they would eventually collapse. My dad's health started to get worse, yet he still tried to wait for me to be home so he could explain everything to me. He was thinking, if both my mom and him had already become monsters, I would definitely be terrified by their looks and ran away. As I listened to my dad's explanation, I finally understood how significant the meat was to all of us now. It was certainly that I would become a monster, but how could my look be more important than living with my parents? Then I took the disgustingly creepy meat from my dad. It took me a while to hold it to my mouth. I closed my eyes with my thoughts on my family, and then I swallowed it. I had given up everything so I could be with them. The normal look of a human being, my study plans, and even my future. Since then, everyone in the city had finally turned into monsters. The factories under severe criticism had to relocate to other areas. The whole city became quiet until one day, a popular vlogger decided to come to our city. Those who lived in the suburbs had warned the young man about the danger of the city as everyone had become monsters. But instead of fearing for it, the man decided to take a risk entering the city, only to find out that the residents here were all friendly, just like normal human beings. Having completed his trip, the vlogger, who had great interest in traveling, decided to write an article expressing the feelings that he had while being in the city. The article went viral as more people started visiting the city and even taking pictures with the monsters. The deserted bus station suddenly became crowded again, as the city had never seen such huge number of tourists coming here for traveling. There were also many YouTubers coming to the city, which contributed to the increasing popularity of the city. My mom and I opened a BBQ store which was near to the bus station. Thanks to it, the economy of my family started to flourish. But little did they know that those meat skewers were all made from the meat that could turn people into monsters. The hideous-looking meat somehow tasted deliciously after being grilled. Lots of people had come to buy our beef skewers, and all of them would be able to enjoy this magic food. It was something that could make them become stronger and turn into monsters like us. Humans are so strange. We build factories to produce cosmetics and jewelry, to develop beauty technologies, yet cruelly destroy the nature and environment that we live in. However, the pollution would take away their health in exchange. Now, all of us had to live in a hideous monster shape in exchange for our health and our human habitat. That's it. The world of human beings is just as scary as that of ghosts and demons. So how could it be wrong for humans to become monsters and live in their purest form? This story revolves around a man named Harold, who was the director of a health insurance company. Recently, his business has been going really well. However, one day he decided to lay off his staff and open up another construction company. That day was the opening ceremony of his new company, and there was something strange. It was unknown how, but for some reason Harold always knew when a natural disaster would strike. That was the reason why so many people had paid him millions of dollars in order to get the health insurance packages that his company offered. As one bought his product, they would completely be protected from the effects of any catastrophe. Harold opened the new company with a promise to help the people rebuild their houses after the natural hazard. At first, people were skeptical of these health insurance packages, but the series of disasters happened later, completely changing their minds. A year back, thanks to Harold and his company, many were saved from disasters. However, Harold was intending to lay off many of his staff members or transfer them. The decision caused dissatisfaction with many of his employees who gathered to oppose him, even threatening to expose the illegal business he had been running. But Harold had already made his plans. He remained extremely calm and comforted the angry crowd. "No need for you to worry. Everyone in the city has bought our health insurance. That's why I need you to move to Europe and start working at our new branches. None of you will be left behind." Having heard the remarks of the director, the angry crowd cooled down and became excited again. None of them was bothered to pay attention to the male employee. Some people in the crowd started calling out his name. "Harold! Harold!" They worshipped him like a god. Despite having everything under control, Harold couldn't help but be furious at the employee's actions. He didn't expect that a normal employee would dare to ruin such a formal event like this. Harold were partially worried that the company's secrets would be exposed, as every time when the company was selling its health insurance to the local people of a certain area, the place would be hit with constant natural disasters. Come to think of it, the man flipped on a secret switch. Suddenly, the white wall in his office room were changed to a wooden shelf with wine barrels above it. Harold approached the wooden shelf as he took out a wine pot with a bizarre shape. On the top of the pot was a red X sign that made it look like some poisonous substance was contained in it. Inside the pot were pictures of clouds, thunder, volcanoes, tsunamis, looking sophisticated and very realistic. It turned out that Harold had been using this jar to create natural disasters as he wished. As one placed the images of people or locations into the jar, natural disasters would happen immediately to either of them. Harold had received this disasters jar from a mysterious man, and it had helped him become rich ever since. This time, he was targeting at that one employee who was causing all the troubles at the ceremony. As he brought out the jar, he went on searching information about that employee on his own. With a few simple manipulations here and there, Harold had found enough information about the man. Not just that, he went on to call his secretary, asking her to give him any information about those who had intentions of opposing him. It looked like Harold was up to something evil. Half an hour later, the secretary showed up at his office room. Harold had already prepared to deal with this mess, and the day for employee transfer had finally come. The number of employees that got transferred to Europe were unexpectedly large, as a large ship was ordered to carry them. However, they weren't allowed to sit on the seats yet, and had to snuggle in the deck below. On the ship appeared many tall big men dressed in black, constantly urging them to get on board, like human traffickers. The employees suddenly had a premonition of danger. As one of the employees got to the door ship and saw what's inside, he couldn't hold in his emotions and howled. It turned out they were being illegally trafficked to Europe. Under the ship deck were dozens of people sitting in the crowded cabin. An employee of the company named Liam immediately got scared. Was his boss Harold up to something evil? At that moment, he realized there was no way for him to turn around. Then the young man quickly got pushed inside the cabin. The thug, having locked up everyone inside, immediately let out an evil smile and left. Hundreds of people huddling with no seat to be seen. There were no lights or food or drinks. Having locked up everyone inside, the thug took out his phone and made a call to Harold. It turned out that Harold had planned everything. His purpose was to kill all of the employees who were against him. As the employees were being led inside the ship, Harold had printed a picture of Liam, the one who caused troubles at the ceremony. As soon as the thugs called him to update him about the situation, he would quickly carry out the next part of his plan. As long as the picture was put into the jar, a devastating disaster would happen on the sea, and those around it would be all affected. As Harold put the picture inside the jar, on the surface slowly appeared a giant shadow that were making its way to the ship that carried hundreds of people. At first, there were a minor shake. Everyone inside the ship mistaken it for waves. However, the ship began to shake violently, which made them feel worried. Especially that male employee. Somehow he was having a premonition that something terrible was about to happen. Immediately there were many loud sounds echoing. Liam quickly looked outside through a small window. His face suddenly became darkened as if he had witnessed something terrifying. It turned out that the shadow was actually of a giant octopus. The ferocious octopus quickly lifted the ship and smashed a part of it with its tentacles. At that moment, the people inside were freaking out as they all rushed to the back of the ship and stayed away from the sea monster as far as possible. However, the ship was completely wrapped by the octopus tentacles. In just a moment, the whole ship was drowned to the sea. A few hours later, hundreds of dead bodies were spotted by the fishermen. The police had carried out an investigation but soon concluded that it was a shipwreck. Harold was extremely delighted to realize that he was actually a god who had supernatural powers, and sooner or later everyone would obey him. After the tragic incident, the families of those who died in it had demanded the company to pay them compensation, yet Harold refused to do it, as he told them the incident was a train wreck, not one that caused by a natural disaster. The employees who were against him were finally removed, but Harold still had one person to get rid of, and that one person was the mysterious X-Man dressed in black. Harold was afraid that the man would expose his secrets and ruin his career. That was why half a year ago he had asked his secretary to collect information about the mysterious man. Meanwhile, on the sea where the tragedy took place, after the devastation caused by the sea monster, the ship was broken into hundreds of pieces. As everyone on the ship was thought to be dead, from the bottom of the sea, someone was floating on the sea, hands clung to a lifebuoy. As time went by, that man Harold still hadn't been exposed while his company had been thriving. After over 6 months collecting information about the mysterious X-Man, Harold's plans eventually bared fruit as one day the female secretary brought to him all the evidence she had found about the man. The man was indeed very mysterious, as it was extremely difficult to approach him or take a clear picture of his face. However, it was worth mentioning that Harold wasn't the only one this mysterious man was stalking. He also watched other people and gave them strange items for his tasting purposes. According to the investigation report, Harold also found out that those who received the items ended up having a tragic death. Therefore, he wanted to get rid of the man to avoid the aftermath. Harold asked the secretary to find a way to contact the man in black and make an appointment with him so he could carry out his plan. As they finally reached out to the mysterious man, Harold told him that he would return the vase, so the man agreed to see him. Later that night, they met each other at an abandoned construction site. The cunning Harold had prepared a printer. He didn't show up. Instead, he was hiding in a corner. Hearing the footsteps of the man, Harold immediately took a picture of that X-Man with his phone, then used the print he had brought with him to scan the picture. Of course, Harold didn't forget to bring the magical jar with him. As the picture was successfully printed, he immediately put it inside the jar. As Harold was exiting, suddenly from behind a voice came out. Not only was the mysterious X-Man there, but also another person who was secretly watching every single move of Harold. And that man was no one but Liam. As Harold saw him, he started trembling. His face immediately changed color. He didn't expect that Liam was still alive and would show up right at that moment. As Liam found out about Harold's secrets, he was shocked that every disaster that had happened for the last 2 years and the people who had that tragically died in the sea incident were all caused by Harold. In a moment of rage, Liam, having lost control of himself, hit Harold on the head with a brick in his hand. Even though the hit just went to the part of his face, it was enough to cause Harold to stagger and fall to the ground. The sudden hit also made him drop the magical jar. It shattered in pieces. However, at that moment, Harold was no longer caring about it. With a coward's look on his face, he begged Liam to spare his life. But Liam wasn't calm enough to hear those lies again. He frantically rushed to Harold and kicked him constantly, ignoring the man's begging for forgiveness. At that moment, the mysterious man showed up as he heard the noises. As soon as Liam saw the mysterious man, he was so confused. Who is this guy in black? Could this be Harold setting me up? But the mysterious man didn't even bother to look at him. He just stared at the broken jar on the ground and sighed. Harold, seeing the man in black, immediately became happy. He quickly crawled to his feet and pleaded for help. Despite not yet being harmed by the mysterious man, Liam quickly panicked as he thought the man was an accomplice of Harold. While the two didn't pay attention to him, he secretly ran away in order to save his life. As Liam had left, Harold tremblingly stood up and said, "The jar is broken, but don't worry, I'll pay for it." The man in black smirked. He told Harold that he could fix it. Finally having a chance to meet someone from the mysterious X organization, Harold couldn't help but be curious. "Don't worry, we just want to make this world a better place. It's a part of our mission." Then the man cleaned up the shattered pieces of the broken jar and revealed to Harold that it was just the cap that mattered, while the jar could easily get replaced, yet work normally. As the man X was not paying attention to Harold, he secretly hid in the corner with an evil look on his face. He was thinking that the man X was so ignorant to tell him that secret. The cap with an X sign on it was like a button that activated the disasters to happen. With a picture of the man and the cap, this time he would surely die. Harold immediately searched for another jar to replace. Then he put the picture inside and closed it with the cap. A few seconds later, the cap had come into play. As the sky was clear, suddenly there were black clouds and strong gusts of wind. The mysterious X-Man was still having no idea what was happening. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a roll of thunder hit them, and then he was struck again by another roll of thunder. The thunders blackened his body and killed him instantly. Harold was exulting to see the man finally get killed. He was under the impression that from now on no one would ever know anything about his wrongdoings. But the nightmare was just getting started. At one Organization X's secret base, a big old tree with the growing cocoons on it. As one person from the organization died, other cocoons started to grow and then fell from the tree. Next, the cocoons hatched and creatures started coming out. How terrifying! The cocoon had hatched another X-Men, as they just looked exactly like each other. Not just one or two, but a lot of them with similar faces and looks had been created from that creepy giant tree. It turned out that the organization had been around on Earth for hundreds of years and were working on its frightening experiments.